Hi guys, welcome to my channel Geography with Narendranath. Today, very important the factor of marine sediments, and this lecture will be elaborate. There are the type of marine sediments also and source of marine sediments. This lecture is very important for UG, PG, alt and competitive examination. Carefully listen, and if you are new, must will subscribe and share my channel. And now start today's is very important topic, the marine sedimentation. Today's is lecture including there are the factor, there are the source of marine sediments, and there are also elaborately explain their classification on marine sediments. Now start my today's topic. And this process of sedimentation such as the deposition of the marine sediments on the ocean bed are affect and the controlled by the three major factor of the marine sedimentation. There are the quantities, suppose the density basically of marine sediments, size and shape of particles, and energy condition of currents at in the site of deposition is very important. As started there earlier, the river are the major transporting agents of marine sediments. The continental rocks are eroded by surface runoff and rivers, and the eroded material are brought to the ocean by these rivers, and these sediments are picked up by sea waves and currents and are deposited on sea floor and under the varying condition. It also there may be mentioned that the terrigenous eroded sediments and sometimes are eroded and depressed by sea waves and currents before they are finally deposited on the sea floor. The rate of sedimentation depends on the rate of erosion of the continental rocks, such as the slow or rapid rate of erosion. And there are the if a continental rocks are resistant to the erosion, and they are eroded and very slowly, and hence there is very low supply of sediments by the rivers and to the ocean, and hence sea wave and currents have enough time to rework and disperse them, and with the result of terrigenous sediments and sorted by the currents according to their size and shape and quantities before they settle down on the seafloor. And for example, sands are graded into the cross and the fine categories. The terrigenous sediment grade from boulders and cobbles and pebbles, gravel, silts, and sands also. And there are the quantities of density of sediment also control. They are sorting and non-sorting of the sediments before they are deposited, and the large quantities of sediments with large size increase the density, and hence high density of sediments are deposited more quickly, and then low density sediments it may be noticed that the rate of sedimentation is very important. The strong bottom currents are characterized of the there are the moving and turbulent water, and such swift and turbulent water carries and fine sediments, suspensions, and branch does not allow them to settle down. And there are the thus weak currents of low energy level and deposit only the fine sediments. It thus become evident that the analysis of grain size of sediments and deposit at the sea floor may be reveal the energy condition at the time when the sediments were deposit on the bottom. And now I talk about very important there another issue, the source of marine sediments. The marine sediments are derived and supplied from the four major sources, basically terrigenous or lithogeneous sources, and Biogenic sources or orogenic sources, and determine the degree of sorting their particles. Thus high density sediments are poorly sorted, and while low density sediments are well sorted before they are deposited in the layer on the sea floors. And the third important factor of the marine sedimentation is energy condition is of bottom current at the site of deposition. The grain size of sediment is proportional there are to the energy and level of Burton current at the time of sedimentation on sea floor. Basically, their hydrogenous source and cosmogenous source is very important. The above mentioned source of marine sediments may be alternative. There are three categories: external source, and basically external source are terrigenous, and internal sources there are biogenous and hydrogenous sources and cosmogenous sources, and these are the three categories. And first of all, the terrigenous or lithogeneous source of marine sediments include weathering and erosion of continental rocks and transport of eroded material by the river, and coastal erosion by the sea wave, and the glacier erosion of continental rocks. And there are transport by glacier to the sea high latitudes, and the winds also transport dust and sand from the hinterlands of the coast to the ocean. The terrigenous source and contributes rock fragments of the varying size, such as the boulders, pebbles, cobbles, and gravels, quartzite, sand, and quartz, silt, clay, dust, etc. And this very important another, there are the biogenous sources of the marine sediment comprise of the process of decay to the decomposition of the cell and skeleton marine organism also. And there in this such their sediment are grouped in two broad categories. There are the calcium carbonate, and cell of marine organism, and there are fragments of coral. And number two, there are silica, siliceous och, basically the biogenous sediments of calcium carbonate produced in warm seawater, while those the silica are generated in cold sea surface water. The hydrogenous sources of the marine sediments include there are the sediments derived from the precipitation of dissolved substance due to the chemical reaction, such as the phosphorus, and there are the oolites, basically calcium carbonate and metal sulfide, and copper, silver, zinc, iron, nickel, and evaporate, such as the gypsum and some salt. And the cosmogenous sources. The cosmogenous sources of marine sediments include the sediment produced from the collision on the meteorites in the space, and thus of the space, basically dust so produced directly fall into the ocean. Beside the volcanic dust and ashes which are ejected through continental volcanic eruption are carried away by the atmosphere circulation, and finally they fall down and through the precipitation into the ocean. And now I explain, this is very important, this topic today. The classification of marine sediment is very important. The marine sediments register large variation in terms of their origin and in for the formation, size, shape, composition, locational aspect, and derived from the various sources such as the lithogeneous and they are terrigenous sources, and wherein the sediment are produced due to the weathering and erosion continental rocks and marine volcanic island. And number two, biogenous sources such which provide the sediments through decay and the distinction of the marine plants and animals, and hydrogenous sources which include the precipitates of dissolved substance in the ocean water. Number four, they are cosmogenous source wherein the sediment are produced due to a collision of meteorites and the such space, and therefore the sediments fall in the ocean, and thus marine sediments involve four major categories of terrigenous, and there are the biogenous and hydrogenous and also cosmogenous sediments, and these four major genus. And number one, the terrigenous means they are lithogenic marine sediments There are derived the two continental lithogeneous and submarine volcanic lithogeneous, such as example gravels, sand, and silt basically, and clay, mud, and mud also derived. There are blue, green, and red mud. And number two, there are biogenous marine sediments. There are the neritic sediments and pelagic. And for example, the calcareous was, petroid was, Globigerina, and siliceous was, radiolarian was, and diatom was. And another number three, the hydrogenous marine sediments. There are the magnesium nodules and phosphates and oolites, basically limestone particles, and metal sulfite and gypsum and halides. And cosmogenous marine sediments also, there are the space dust, basically meteorites particles such as the iron, nickel, meteorites, and silicates, basically. And number five, the volcanogenic marine sediments such as volcanic dust and volcanic ashes. And first I explained there are terrigenous lithogenic sediments. Basically, the lithogenic sediments are derived from the weathering and erosion of the rocks. Lithos means the rocks, and stone, and there are genius means the genera to produce, whether on the land or in the ocean, and sea volcanic, such as the where the lithogeneous is the sedimentation, including only those sediments of various size, basically to clay particles, and which are the produced by weathering and erosion of the only continental rocks, is very important. And basically the terrigenous sediments can be deposited in the various location of the ocean, namely bays and lagoons, and near the coast of the mouth of river in form of the delta, in river estuary in parallel to the coast of from the branch. And the terrigenous sediments brought by the river to the ocean are the also carried away and networked by sea waves and currents. And there are the very important, most of terrigenous material are deposited in the area of continental margin and inner continental shelves, but high build up of terrigenous sediments on continental shelf from safe. And there are the sediment steep slope, and thus of the sediments slide down enough, they're under the impact of gravity and along the continental slope. And the distribution of terrigenous sediments on the sea floor is obliquous. There are the widespread, and the other word, the terrigenous sediments have been found almost in all parts of the ocean, and but most concentration is found the continental margin and continental shelf also. Only trace of the terrigenous sediments have been found on deep sea points. The fine particles are picked up by prevailing winds from the tropical and subtropical desert, and they are the carried far away from the continents to the deep ocean, where these are particles fall down and settle down on the deep sea plane. And there is the basically there are gravels, sands, mud, basically boulder, pebbles, and sands. They are very coarse and the medium fine grain. And such as these terrigenous sediments are composed mostly of quartz minerals, and the texture of terrigenous sediments is determined on the base of grain size, for which of the following Windward scale is used. And there are the some gravels, means the diameter of gravel range from 2 mm to 256 mm, and boulders and cobbles and granulates, etc. These sediments are further reduced in the size due to further distinguished caused by the sea wave. And basically there are the sands, the sediments varying in the diameter from 2 mm to 1 to 1 by 16 mm to the term of sands. On the basis of size of grain, sands are classified into 5 types, there are the very coarse sands 1 to 2 mm, and coarsest sands 0.5 to 1 mm, and medium there are 0.25 to 0.5, and fine sands 0.725 to 0.25, and there are the very fine sands 0.0625 to 0.125 mm. The distinction of communication of continental rocks fragments into fine sediments, they are produced, and sand which are deposited in the ocean by river and surface winds, and there is marked gravitation of the sand deposits in the ocean. And sealed clay and mud also include here. There are the fine sediments ranging in the diameter from 1 to 30 1 by 32 mm to 1 by 81 mm, and there are mud is still fine than clay. Sometimes silt and clay are included in the category of mud. Clay is significant. There are the cementing elements, and these material are brought from the countries by the river. Clay and mud are deposited in clay. There are seawater by the low energy currents, and generally these deposits are found in the depth of 1000 to 100 fathoms. There are there, and blue mud is very important in this point. Blue mud including the material derived through the distinction of the rocks is in iron and sulfuric and the organic elements, and these are generally found of the greater depth of the continental shelf. The original color of blue mud is blues and black, and contains 35% of the calcium carbonate, and blue mud predominates in the Atlantic Ocean and Mediterranean Sea, Arctic Sea, and encloses there are the different sea. And red mud also, the sediments derived through the communication of the rocks and reach the iron oxide from red mud, and the reddish color is mainly due to the dominance of the iron content. It contains 32% of the calcium carbonate. The deposit of red mud is confined mostly to the Yellow Sea and Brazilian coast, and also the floor of Atlantic Ocean. And green mud is formed due to chemical weathering, and weathering the color of blue mud is changed. The green mud due to the reaction of the seawater, it contained green silicate of the potassium and basically glutatine from the basically iron, and which consists 7 to 8% total mineral composition. And this deposit of green mud are found along the Atlantic and Pacific coast and North America and coast of Japan, Australia, Africa. And number 2, I explain about the volcanogenic sediments. Their volcanogenic materials deposit in the marine environment are derived from two sources. Number 1, volcanic eruption on the land use. Volcanic material through the violent central eruption become very fine due to collision among themselves, and due to further distinction, fine volcanic material near to the coastal lands are blowing by winds and are carried there the ocean, while the volcanic material of distant place are brought by the river via overflow and rainwaves really, and the small different volcanic eruption in the ocean and the sea. In such case, volcanic material are directly deposited, and volcanic material resemble blue mud and are gray and black in the color. And another, the number 3 point, biogenic sediments, basically biogenous. Bio means life, and generis to produce, and also know as organic marine sediments are the decay and distinction of hard parts and skeleton and marine organism. Thus the source of biogenic and sediments is sea itself. The process of formation, the biogenous marine sediments include the distinction of hard part of marine animals and plants such as there are the bones, hairs and teeth, and after their death, and such material fall down on the after another, and there are deposit on the sea floor and varying the location. Primarily biogenous marine sediments are divided into the following two. There are the there are the macroscopic and microscopic biogenic sediments. Basically microscopic biogenic sediments and macrogenic sediments. And basically microscopic biogenic sediments include the cells, bones and teeth of the large marine animals which are not widespread sea living organism, and such as sediments are found on continental shelf and very rate of deep sea plain, and because deep sea floor are dominated by the very small organism. On the other hand, there are the microscopic biogenous sediments are very small particles of very small sea organism, and they are so small and minute that they cannot be seen without the aid of powerful microscope. And there are the countless tiny and microscope marine organism. The tiny cells on the organism are called the tests, which continuously fall down on the seabed after the death. In fact, there is continuous rain of countless tests of microscopic organism, and the accumulation of this test on deep sea floors and gives the birth of formation of the different type of the arch. The arch consists of 30% of microscopic biogenous sediments and the remaining 70% of the terrigenous clay. It may be mentioned that microscopic biogenic materials and terrigenous clay fall down together to settle down on the deep sea spore also. And also the biogenic sediments are also derived. There are the narrative biogenic sediments and pelagic biogenic sediments. The narrative matter basically include the skeletons of marine organism and plant remains, while the pelagic matter consists of remains of different type of algae. The skeleton of animal and dead plants are subject to the decomposition of the chemical changes, and thus they are changed to mud and sands, and there are the ultimately deposit on the seawater. And narrative matter is deposited mostly on the continental shelf and are generally covered by terrigenous materials, and these include the shell of mollusca and therefore fragment skeleton and radiolarian. And this basically there are the next there are pelagic sediments consist of matter derived from algae, and the most of from liquid and mud generally known as arch. And pelagic materials basically are the ores which are derived into two groups of this base of the lime and silica contents. Number one, the calcareous arch. There are content lime contents in abundance, and there are the seldom found and greater depth, and because of there are high degree of solubility, and they generally found of the sea floor between the depth range from 1000 fathom. On the basis of principal organism calcareous ores and further derived in the two types. There are the petripod ores and Globigerina ores. Petripod ores, basically most of the petripod ores are formed of floating petripod mollusca having there the cell generally conical shape with average diameter of half an inch, and the continent 80% their calcium carbonate and is mostly found in the tropical ocean sea in the depth of 3000 to 1000 fathom. It decreases with the generally depth of particular and disappeared beyond the 2000 fathoms depth. And Globigerina ores, basically these ores is formed by a cell of a variety of foraminiferous. For most of such ores are formed the jams called the Globigerina, and when this deposit is dripped up, it become dirty while they are powder, and beside milky white the color, it is the also blue and gray and yellow and green in color. The chemical composition reveals also there 64.4%. There are the calcium 1.64% and silica 3.33% minerals. And Globigerina is found mostly in the tropical and temperate zone of the Atlantic Ocean, on the eastern and western continental shelf, on the Indian Ocean, and it is the eastern Pacific Ocean. It is generally found between the depth of 2000 to 4000 fathom, become the absence of the greater depth. And siliceous ores, basically when the silica content dominates, the ores become siliceous in the nature. And there are the very important for silica is derived from a group of protozoa or radiolarian, and beneath animal mainly spongy. This ores does not dissolve as compared to the calcareous ores because of less calcium carbonate and dominance of the silica. Thus such as ores are found in both warm and cold water at greater depth. This group is further derived into two broad and the organism radiolarian ores and diatom ores. Radiolarian ores is formed by the cell of radiolarian, and the formula for in this change directly gray powder, and when the andesite and the silica predominates, but calcium carbonate is also present, and there are 5 to 20% and average being 4%. And lime content decrease with increase the depth of absolutely disappear at the greater depth. This ores is found up to the depth of 2000 to 5000 fathom in the tropical ocean and sea. It cover a large area in the Pacific Ocean, and diatom ores is found on the shell of very microscopic plants and containing there are silica in abundance, and it also contains some clay, and calcium content varies from 3 to 30%. It is the blue near the land, and the color change yellow and cream away from the land. It's become fine. There are the diatom ores is very frequently found and greater depth in the high latitudes, and significant area of the deposit include the ocean and Oz, and where there are the Antarctica and the belt of Alaska, of Japan, and North Pacific depth 600 to 2000 fathom also. And next number 4, there are the hydrogenic marine sediments. Hydrogenous sediments are also inorganic matter and involved there are the precipitates of dissolved and substance from the water both on land and in the ocean, and majority of the there are the inorganic elements are basically there are the precipitates and which fall down from above. These are elements fall on the land as well as there are the ocean. Some of the inorganic elements are transport from the land to the ocean by the various agents. The inorganic precipitates and inform the inorganic precipitates, they are including dolomites, amphibites, and silica, iron, magnesium oxide, phosphate, and they are the different inorganic. The organic and inorganic material are so mixed together due to the chemical process. This become very different isolated. And manganese noodles have round shape and the consist of manganese and iron and some minerals. There are the found around the nucleum, the coral and volcanic rocks. and some bones and fishes and fish teeth and their manganese noodles are primarily composed manganese and dioxide, that iron oxide also. And phosphate are in fact compound of phosphates, and which is the precipitates and coating there around the rocks. And carbonates, including two significant minerals, and there are the calcites, which is composed to the calcium carbonates, and metal sulfutes are generally found along the mid-oceanic ridge, and including iron, copper, silver, nickel, zinc, and many there are still the other evaporate minerals are gypsum and calcite. And next, another there the red clay, basically a type of the hydrogenic marine sediments. Red clay basically previously considered to be of the organic origin is the most significant inorganic matter and very important member of pelagic deposits. It covers the large area and deep sea deposits. There are silicates, aluminium, and oxide and iron are the chief constituents the clay, and beside the calcium and siliceous organism and few minerals of the present. It contains and decomposed volcanic material. It may be point out that the red clay, and there are the basically is dominant located area between 40° north to 40° south Atlantic Ocean, present part of Indian Ocean and North Pacific and Ocean, covering 129 million kilometer area basically. And number 5, there are the cosmogenic sediments. This is the last source type of classification, cosmographic sediments. Basically, cosmogenous sediments are extraterrestrial terrestrial materials, basically extra terrestrial materials which are produced due to the collation of meteors on the space, and this way and cosmogenic and the sediment are called space dust, and which regularly fall down on the earth's surface, and both on the lands and the ocean. And cosmogenous sediments comprise there are the microscope basically, and there are the microscopic debris of material also. And this lecture also cover there are the marine sediment classification and source of marine sediments, and also about the factor of marine sediments. Thank you to all.